Hello there and welcome to the Hungry Heracross, where we rank, analyze and create Zelda and Pokemon. Bosses are a staple of the Legend of Zelda series, and whilst those from the 3D games tend to take the spotlight, there are some hidden gems amongst the top-down titles. Link's Awakening is no exception, with its nightmares a unique twist on the classic boss formula. In line with the game's quirky persona, most of the big baddies here are visually stunning and shine with personality. Yet, some do it a lot better than others, so today I'm going to be ranking all the main bosses in the game, from worst to best. I'll be taking into consideration the enemy's design, its character, the setting of the battle, and the fight itself. But before we go any further, a massive spoiler warning, as we will be discussing the final boss and some key plot points from the game. So if you haven't finished Link's Awakening and you don't want the story to be ruined, add this video to your watch later. Included in today's ranking will be all 8 nightmares from the 8 main dungeons, as well as Hardhit Beetle, the final boss of the optional Color Dungeon, and the Shadow Nightmares, who I'm going to be considering as one boss for this ranking. This leaves us with a nice round number of 10 bosses to rank. So who do you think is going to be number 1? If you're brave enough, drop your prediction in the comments, and while you're there, it would be great if you could please give this video a like and share it with a friend. On to the ranking. Consider this, you've just gone through the gauntlet that is Turtle Rock, one of the best dungeons in the game. And through that, you've acquired the Magic Rod, which you've used to melt through ice and tear through enemies. So your expectations are running high as you enter the final boss room, only to be greeted with this flaming mess. What a disappointment. I feel that a lot of people consider Tantalus as one of the most underwhelming bosses in the series, but Hothead takes the cake for me. The design is okay, it's a flaming head. Not the most exciting design, but there's enough potential there to hope for some development in a second or third phase. But no, the second phase just loses its fiery exterior. The setting also looks the same as other rooms we've already seen throughout the dungeon, which is another disappointment, especially coming off the back of some previously exciting boss rooms. Then, to cap it all off, the battle has a difficulty level better suited to an early game dungeon. You use your magic rod to shoot the hothead when it jumps out of the pool of flames, for no reason I may add, slightly moving from side to side to dodge the fire that it shoots at you. We do something similar against Genie, and not only is that a harder challenge, Genie's also one of the first bosses in the game. After a few hits, it does have a second phase as I mentioned, but it's much of the same. Shoot with your rod, move from side to side. It would have been so enjoyable to have an interactive boss battle that made better use of the magic rod, ideally with a design that either looked cooler, more menacing, or had some quirky personality. In saying that though, one of these nightmares has to take the last spot on the list, and it can only go up from here. In 9th we have a jumping quality with Slime Eyes, the nightmare of the Key Cavern. This boss executes the Zelda trope of using the dungeon item to defeat the dungeon boss really well with the Pegasus boots. You initially use these new wheels to ram into the wall to make the slime eye appear, which is great. You then use the boots again to split the eye in two by running through its stretched body, I guess? The Pegasus boots are great for running across the screen, but its charge time doesn't make them the most fun or practical to use in fights. So I think this battle gets the most out of this item without it becoming too annoying. That said, it's not the most engaging or intriguing boss battle. The boss's main method of attacking you is to bounce up high and squish you, or stun you as it makes impact with the ground. But using the Rock's Feather, the sword, and the previously mentioned Pegasus boots, you can dispatch of this nightmare with relative ease. It does well to cram in 3 phases, but when you give this many phases to an early game boss, it is hard to give sufficient time to each of them, which is where this boss becomes a little bit unstuck. There's also not too much you can do with a giant eye. It does feel like a Zelda in-joke given that so many enemies have a giant eye as a weak spot, but it's hard for a design like this to stack up to something with a little bit more intricacy. Facade is a boss that definitely adds to the quirkiness of the game as a face with some questionable powers. After a quick, humorous exchange, the tiles and the bottles in the room will be thrown towards you. We've seen this happen earlier in the game, so it's unclear whether Facade is behind this attack, or whether it's just there having a laugh while sentient tiles launch themselves at you. But once those tiles are all done, certain squares on the floor will start to turn into holes. Again, it's unclear whether this is the Nightmare's doing, but let's assume it is, otherwise Facade becomes incredibly pathetic. Anyway, to defeat this creepy boss, you need to place a bomb on its face, all whilst dodging the aforementioned tiles and avoiding the increasing number of holes in the room. It's a pretty straightforward fight, as most in this game are. Having to use the bombs may not be obvious straight away, but once you figure out the puzzle, there isn't too much of a challenge. It's a different boss fight to say the least, and the setting and boss design are both fine without being amazing, but it just feels a little lackluster. I know I shouldn't, but I can't help compare this to the Oracle of Seasons fight with Facade, where it also shoots fire at you. So in comparison, this one feels so passive, which brings it down to the lower half of this list. That, and it's a bit lame compared to everything else above it. Moldorm. This poor friend cops a lot of criticism because of its link to the past namesake. I think that's unfair. Moldorm is a fun boss that is an adequate challenge as the first nightmare in the game. The fight takes place in a standard sized room with some cracked tiles on the side and some empty spaces in the corner. If you fall through one of these at any time in the battle, you drop down to a bottom area, which is kind of grim when you look at it closely. The dropping down to another level is a nice homage to its predecessor. However, in this game, it's unlikely that you're going to fall into this room. To defeat this Moldorm, you need to slash its tail with your sword, which then causes Moldorm to become invincible for a short while, whilst speeding up its movements. It only takes a few hits to be defeated, but the difficulty in landing the hit increases as the battle progresses, which is great. It can also knock you around as it moves around the room, which may knock you into the room below, but like we discussed, it's unlikely. Design wise, I get that it's meant to be a worm of sorts, but all I see when I look at this enemy is a chain of burgers. Am I alone here? It just makes me hungry. It's not bad per se, but I think the other Moldorms that we see just look a lot better. Moving on. Has there ever been a bigger glow up in the Zelda series than the Anglerfish? I doubt it. This sea-dwelling merchant went from one of the worst bosses in the entire franchise back in its Game Boy days to becoming one of the most visually stunning boss battles in the top-down titles. If this ranking was purely based on arena setting, then this would be in contention for the top spot. The underwater environment is exquisite with the textures in the walls and the skulls lying across the seafloor. The Anglerfish's model is of equal quality, not just in design, but also with the way it moves through the water. You can tell that they put a lot of effort in amending this disaster from the original game. That said, this boss ain't perfect. The fight is still incredibly simplistic, where you slash away with your sword until the nightmare dies. The fish does charge at you from time to time, but you're never worried about dying against the anglerfish. I do like how the roof, or floor I guess, will crumble onto you from time to time, and I also like how you get some bounce back when you attack the fish. But it's still not enough to be an adequate challenge for where this boss lies in the game. I do think this fight is quite enjoyable though, and it's visually stunning. But yeah, that sheer simplicity and lack of variety in the fish's attacks prevent it from reaching the top half of this list. Next up is the lovable clown named Genie. I quite like this design as a standalone creature, but when you're named after a well-known entity such as a Genie, the design should probably reflect that a little bit better than it does. Name and design mismatch aside, this is the second nightmare of the game, but the first to really show us some character. It's got some quirky dialogue, acknowledging that it's the villain, which I adore. Some may argue that it talks a bit too much, giving the player some very obvious hints on how to defeat it, but I think this is okay. The hand-holding doesn't really take away from the fight. Genie starts off by coming out of its bottle, to shoot fireballs at you. After you've dodged a few fireballs, it'll hide back in its bottle for protection. It's a smart boss, we like that. But Link's smarter, so once you've thrown the bottle at the wall to crack it, the Genie has nowhere to hide. For the second phase, it does this really cool thing of throwing fireballs at you and then following up with an array of punches. In a way, I would have loved to see this as a later fight in the game because the attacking prowess of Genie would lend itself really well to an increased difficulty. But nevertheless, this is still a really great boss fight that I always enjoy replaying. If you like your colours, then you're in for a treat with this next boss, Hardhit Beetle. This colour dungeon final boss has a glorious design, with a shell that gradually changes colour with each hit, going from blue to green to yellow to orange and eventually red. With each hit, cracks form on its shell until the beetle's exterior looks like shattered glass. But in a unique twist, if this creature is left alone for a few seconds, it will start to heal itself. The cracks reform and the colour heads back towards its original blue state. With this in mind, you need to be constantly attacking, otherwise all your effort is for naught if the boss heals itself up again. But it's not as simple as hack and slash your way to victory. Throughout the fight, Hardhit Beetle will shoot projectiles at you that you'll need to block. These only increase in speed and frequency throughout the battle. In addition, Stealthos will fall from the ceiling, blocking your path to victory, making the fight even more difficult. Everything in this boss battle is awesome. Design, great. Challenge, fantastic. And it forces you to be proactive. But the best part about this might just be the beetle's link to the dungeon and the colour tunics available upon completion. As you start the fight, Hardhit Beetle's shell is blue and sturdy, and it's focused on defending itself, similar to how the blue tunic is a symbol of defense. Likewise, when the shell becomes red, the beetle is at its most aggressive, attempting to deal more damage to the player, symbolic of how the red tunic provides you with added strength. The blue and red colouring, subtly reflecting the final reward, is one of the best examples of a boss matching the dungeon's thematics in the entire series, and it's what helps elevate this battle over those that have come before it. Up next we have Evil Eagle, but I question whether this eagle is evil at all, or if it's just doing bad things because it has the Grim Creeper on its back. Given that all the dialogue appears to be coming from the skeleton, I'd argue that it's actually old mate Bones who's the final boss, and not this innocent bird. But hypotheticals aside, this is a great nightmare fight set atop the picturesque Eagle's Tower. This is my favourite final boss location in the game, and it has this sense of epicness to it as you try and fend off this giant beast without falling off a great height. Evil Eagle has a variety of attacks which you have to defend against, including flying into you, swooping and clawing at you, and my favourite, launching a barrage of feathers and wind in an attempt to knock you off the ledge. For the most part, you use your newly acquired mirror shield to defend these onslaughts, while slashing away at the opportune moments. There are also times where you can attack the flying fiend with some of the other items in your arsenal, such as the hookshot and arrows. Just like everything else in Eagle's Tower, this nightmare has a fantastic design. It's got this look of intimidation whilst maintaining its coolness and charm. A very enjoyable and visually stunning fight that's well worthy of this top 3 spot. The final battle of this epic quest takes place in the mysterious landmark that has been present since the start of the game. The Shadow Nightmares introduce themselves as we, suggesting that they are a collective rather than a single entity, so make of that what you will. The battle starts off with a shadow moving from underneath the player, which is really symbolic and quite a nice touch. The boss room has an eerie feel to it, crowned with a drawing of the windfish in the centre. It doesn't quite have the ambience of the anglerfish or evil eagles fight, but I prefer this location when compared to the other boss fights that also take place in a single room. This fight consists of 6 separate shadows, so let's quickly touch on all of them. You initially fight the giant gel, which is a repeat of the giant buzz blob battle without the electricity. The trick here is to use the magic powder, just like you did in the Color Dungeon mini-boss battle. However, it's not the first thing that comes to mind, so this fight can sometimes take a little bit long. Second is a repeat of the Aghanim fight from A Link to the Past, or Zelda Tennis as a lot of fans like to call it. If you haven't played A Link to the Past, I recommend it. It's available as an NES download on the Switch, and it's a lot of fun. Anyway, you hit certain projectiles back at the shadow whilst dodging the other. It's short, sharp, fun. Third is Moldorm, which really didn't need to be repeated. I would have been happy to have this as the only Moldorm fight in the game and have a completely new boss for the first dungeon, but that's just me. This one does look a lot better, and it's harder, but still the same fight essentially. Fourth, we have Shadow Ganon, and this is where it starts to get really good. You need to dodge the fire kicks that it sends to you, then dodge the spinning trident so that you can then land a spinning attack on Ganon. It's a lot of fun and one of the best challenges the game has to offer. Fifth, we have the Land Molar, which you can cheese with the boomerang or a spin attack again. Nothing too special here, but lastly we have the Deathel, another great fight. It has an obvious weak point in its eye, which only opens for short bursts. Often these bursts are when its arm-like appendages are in front of it, meaning that you have to jump out of the way of those and quickly strike the shadow's weak spot. All in all, the Shadow Nightmares are a collection of fun fights that strike a decent balance of quality and quantity. If I was ranking the fights or forms separately, I'd give Ganon and Deathel first and second, followed by Aghanim, Moldorm, Land Molar, and then Giant Cell. They're all fun fights, but it would have been great to have some more originality. Even though the 3 repeat phases from A Link's Awakening are superior to the original encounters, it would have been nice to have something a little different. Perhaps the second version of Deathel could have worked well, or maybe something where you left the room. But that's just a little nitpicking before we get to the number 1 spot. In my opinion, Slime Eel is easily the best boss in the game, and it kicks things off with an epic entrance. After saying it's going to eat you, it destroys the room. Its tail rises through the floor of the centre, whilst its head smashes down the northern and southern rock walls. From there, you know this nightmare isn't messing about. As the battle commences, it spins its spiked tail around the centre of the room, preventing you from standing in the one place for too long. Not only does this look awesome, it also means that at all times you need to keep an eye out for this, so that you don't get caught out. Occasionally, its head will pop out from one of the 4 holes in the wall, giving the player the chance to grab it with the hookshot, bringing it into the centre. This reveals a bright pink weak spot for you to slash away. But there's a twist. On occasion, you'll hookshot out a head that turns out to be a decoy slime eel. This just chases you around and explodes. Not what you want. There's a subtle difference in the eyes, so you need to pay attention to make sure you don't pull out the wrong eel, also while avoiding that tail still in the middle of the room. There's a lot going on, but that's perfect. It makes the nightmare fight so interesting. I am a huge fan of battles where there's a lot going on and you need to think your way through it, and Slime Eel hits that better than any boss in the game. It also helps that I just adore this design. The tail reminds me of a dinosaur that I cannot pronounce, and the colours, shapes and movements are all so stunning. A clear best boss for me. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Be sure to let me know what your favourite boss is in the comments. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, You may also be interested in the mini-boss ranking I did for Link's Awakening, which you can find right here. I still have a few more Link's Awakening videos planned, including dungeon, NPC, and soundtrack rankings, along with something a little bit different. So, subscribe if you're keen on that stuff, and so you don't miss out on any of the other Zelda and Pokemon related content I put out. But until then, stay safe, stay kind, and I'll see you next time on the Hungry Heracross.